absolutely. But also, they're not regarded. They don't regard themselves as Muslims anymore. Start to sound a little like Judaism. So let's turn a page. So again, going back to the early days of Islam, people of the book, meaning Jews or Christians or Zoroastrians or later even Hindus or Buddhists, because even though they're not mentioned in the Quran, as the Islamic conquests expanded, they encountered people of all sorts of new religions and they had to deal with them. People of the book who reside within Muslim territories, within the abode of Islam, and agreed to pay a poll tax are entitled to the protection of the Muslim community. Okay? And this protection is called
Dhimmi.
dhimma.
Dhimma.
DH is like the like TH with the word this. So dhimma or zimma, depending on your dialect or exactly. Snagid or fasid. So they're entitled to the protection of life and property. Meaning, basically how this came about is that when Muslims started expanding the Muslim empire, they encountered Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, Hindus that were living there, and even though the commandment was kill everybody unless they convert, they knew that this is impossible and not practical. It is much, much better to just say, okay, just pay us taxes and all will be good. And so basically any non-Muslim that were living in the Muslim empire that agreed to pay a tax were entitled to the protection of life and property. It's not only life and property, also freedom of worship to some extent, and a measure of legal autonomy. And that is an important point. Why do, let's say, Jews living under Muslims require legal autonomy? First of all, ohalah. We have our own legal system, and
Weddings, divorces, it's the civil.
marriage, divorces, that's part of it. But you know, when looking at tshuvot from before the modern period, today when you're looking at tshuvot given by Orthodox rabbis, most of them deal with either family law or ritual with ohalah or yoradea, right? But if you're going to pre-modern period, most of them deal with choshen mishpat. Most of them deal with civil law because there were no civil courts. And more than that, if a Jew were to appeal to a Muslim court of law, they would be in a pretty bad disadvantage. Same in the Christian world, right? If you would sue your Christian neighbor in the Roman Empire, we know how that would end. So basically, the dhimmis were entitled to basically live their lives according to their own laws, as long as they paid taxes and as long as they recognize the superiority of Islam, which obviously can be interpreted in any way you want.
Is dhimma the protection, or is dhimma the name for the people who are protected?
Dhimma is the protection. The protected people are dhimmis.
Very good.
Okay? In the 700s, a number of conditions known as the Pact of Ummah, named after the Caliph, the Muslim emperor at the time, these conditions were set that basically limited what dhimmis can do. Okay? So
Already in the 7th century.
8th century, yes. The
So
7th.
before the big conquering of Spain and then all that.
Yes, before that.
Okay.
So, and these conditions or restrictions changed from time to time depending on the local ruler. But in pretty bad times, for instance, Jews and Christians had to wear distinguishing articles of clothing, right? These weird hats. Christians had to wear blue hats. Jews had to wear yellow. This is where it comes from. This is where the yellow badges come from. Within that, even though Jews and Christians were entitled to freedom of worship, you could not build new churches or synagogues. You could only keep the ones that exist. And all churches and synagogues had to be lower than the local mosque. That is, of course, in theory. In practice, if you had the money to build a new synagogue, you could probably pay someone else. That we pretty much know, because synagogues and churches were built in the Muslim world. It depended not only on the hospitality of the local authority, but depending on how much money the Jews and the Christians had. The Zimma also, like Islamic law, also limited interaction with the things. Okay? So, the Quran, for instance, forbids categorically marrying mushrikat, marrying idol worshippers. Okay? You're not allowed to marry them no matter what. But what about marrying dhimmis? Different story, right? So, a Muslim man can marry a dhimmi woman, but not the other way around. Why?
Islam passes through the father.
Sorry?
Because Islam passes through the father.
Okay, I was waiting for that.
Is that not true?
It's kind of true. Like everything in halacha, it depends, right? But everybody's heard that Islam goes through the father, but it is not the same way that Judaism goes through the mother. I mean, the Jewish traditional definition of patrilineal descent means that Judaism is genetic. That can only be passed through the mother. It's something pretty much mystical, right? You either got it or you don't.
It's contained in the X chromosome.
Exactly.
The what?
Contained in the X chromosome. Yeah. Islam is not regarded in the same way. It is not considered to be something that you're born with. But Islam says that, the father is the one who decides upon the religion of the household. So meaning, if you were born to a Muslim father and sent out for adoption, it doesn't mean that you were a Muslim, right? It's not like someone who knows that their birth mother is Jewish but were raised Catholic, they're still Jewish. It's not the same way, basically. And a lot of people say, oh, well, if you have a Jewish mother and a Muslim father, then both religions would want to claim you.
No.
Well, maybe, but not necessarily. I mean, it's not ontological, right? It's not that no matter what, when you were born to a Muslim father, you will always be a Muslim. So basically, because the man is considered to be the head of the household in traditional Islam, and the man would decide the religion of the children, then Muslim men are allowed to marry Jewish and Christian women, not the other way around. The other way around.
They are allowed to bring them into their household.
Exactly.
But a Muslim woman cannot go into someone else's household.
Exactly. This is also to do with that in traditional Islam, obviously this is not the way it has been taught. Today, marriage is seen as a form of ownership or slavery, right? And since, just like a Jew cannot have a Muslim slave in Islamic law, because it's considered to be demeaning, a woman cannot be subjugated to a Jewish husband. So someone's...
Yeah, so if a woman converts,
All bets are off.
are converts considered of equal status or lesser status?
If a woman converts to what?
To Islam, if converts are considered the same status,
Convert to Islam, are they considered?
theoretically, same status. Everybody was a convert in Islam, right? Muhammad tried to win converts. So basically, people who accepted Islam are Muslim. End of story. And you probably heard that they don't need an introduction to Islam course and the mikveh and the Beit Din and things like that. Conversion to Islam takes exactly 3 seconds. You declare that there is only one God and that Muhammad is God's prophet in front of two male witnesses, and you're done.
There's a very funny routine done by a Muslim woman about how, she was sure that everybody in the room had accidentally converted to Islam. So I didn't realize.
Kind of like that. Yeah, Matt.
Oh, would you parallel this? This is something I'm feeling. I wonder if you would contrast it at all. Parallel this sort of approach to perhaps intermarriage to sort of what was at the time of Tanakh, that men could marry wives from Ethiopia or from all sorts of
exactly,
other
but
places
not the
because
other
of
way around.
property issues.
Right? Kind of like the Shvuyaya Fatwa, even. Right? When you could marry a woman who was captured in the battlefield. So yeah, that's perfectly good comparison.
That's property.
Theoretically, one can become a Jew just as easily.
Theoretically,
I mean,
yes.
go through mikveh, and if you're a male circumcision, say the blessings, and zap, you're a Jew. It's just that no responsible rabbi will do it without a course of study.
Today.
Today.
Okay. We can talk about
But you
that
have to
forever and ever.
teach, you have to teach before that.
No, well, not
the
Talmudically.
but the ceremony is what does it.
Muslims requires circumcision.
Muslims are required to circumcise their children, but it's not a part of the Geirut. It's not something that you are required to do. Basically, if you acknowledge God and acknowledge Muhammad as God's messenger, you're a Muslim. End of story. Pretty easy to start from. Then. Okay. Any questions about Dhimma for now? Yes.
What is the shortage of that word? What is it from?
Short. DHMI. And I don't remember what it is.
What is it?
I
You
don't
mean second
remember.
class citizen origin, that's what
It's protection, basically.
It's protection. Okay.
A liberal Muslim colleague of mine once described the jizya, the tax.
Yes.
It sounded, and I learned it in my Jewish history class. It sounded very draconic. And for him, it was like, no, this is just a parallel tax that would be, if you were Muslim, levied on you as like a tithe. Where, so is this just a modernist reading, or is the jizya like what's the anatomy of that tax?
Okay, so the jizya, or the poll tax that Dhimmis had to pay in order to get that protection, like everything, it depends who you ask. Some would say it's a tax that you have to pay for not being a Muslim and for just to show that we ruled the school. Others would say Muslims had to pay the exact same thing, or at least a little less, but Muslims participated in the army. Jews and Christians were not required to participate in the conquests, so this tax was put on them as basically a substitute for their army service. So again, depends who you ask. So the attitudes towards the Dhimmis changed depending on time and circumstances, and that is almost goes without saying, but it's still required to do that. And scholars agree that since the time of the Crusades, the attitudes towards the Dhimmis became more and more strict. And obviously, Christians suffered a lot more than the Jews at those time. When you're treated badly by other people, you're more inclined to treat them badly yourself. But also the medieval sources and Western travelers indicate that humiliation was a big part of the way the Dhimmis were treated in the Middle Ages. Meaning, the whole idea of the synagogues and churches being lower, Muslims could ride horses while the Jews and Christians could only ride donkeys that are inferior animals. et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So why this happened? Some of it may be a parallel threat to the way Muslims were treated by the Christians. Some of it to do with the fact that Muslims became the majority group in some places. So there were basically no theological reasonings for why the minorities were treated badly. It was more political circumstances. You could see evidence for that trend in the writings of Ibn Taymiyyah. It's a 14th it's a 14th century scholar that is considered to be very prominent amongst fundamentalist groups today. And he said that the Dhimma regulations should be enforced very, very strictly, and more than that, that the way that those Jews behave basically made them ineligible for protection anymore, and they're just infidels that should be killed no matter what.
Orin?
Yes.
James Carroll in his book Jerusalem claims that anti-Semitism was introduced to the Muslim population during the Crusades. Is that and that therefore changed then some of the attitudes?
This is a huge debate.
Okay, I want to check that.
Right? Some say that anti-Semitism has been there all along. Some say that it was introduced by the Christians, and more than that, about 20 years ago, someone by the name of Mark Cohen published. You know that article?
Yeah.
I noticed.
Yes. It's published this article called "Myth, Counter Myth, and History," which is about the way who was treated worse, Jews in Christian countries or Jews in Muslim countries, and that started a huge debate about whether Islam was inherently anti-Semitic, or it was that introduced by the Christians, or basically how were Jews treated in different times. And that started this exchange of letters and columns in Tikkun magazine. Jury is still out, basically. Yes, Ken?
Would it be okay to ask about, since we're mentioning this, Ahmed's second attack on the Jews, and was it Mecca or Medina? And can you get into that, or is that?
You know what? I'd rather not, because I don't remember the exact details, and I don't want to.
And he's being videoed.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
I think it might be worth saying that the history is contentious.
Of course.
We know of periods, David Nuremberg writes about it extensively in the Islamic Spain, in the Iberian Peninsula. There are laws in the Jewish community, in the Muslim community, and in the Christian community that talk about death for marrying dhimmis, or Muslim men who are put to death for going and seeing Jewish prostitutes, and Jewish men who go and see Muslim prostitutes and then are caught and put to death. So the history is uneven at best.
Exactly. But the history is also complicated.
Yes.
The history is complex, and what Mark Cohen says is, if you look at the Iberian Peninsula, yes, there was a golden age at the end of the day. It did exist. Muslims and Jews did cooperate. There were tons of scholarly debates. We know that Rambam wrote in Arabic, and that I debated with a lot of Muslim scholars at the time, and yet we also have these kinds of stories. So like I said at the beginning, it's complicated.
Yes.
And
It's
what
not,
time period did we sort of cooperate?
Sorry?
The Golden Age.
The Golden Age, Islamic Spain.
We have the Jewish poets that have records of it.
Absolutely.
We have theoretically, we're not sure if it's true, the Jewish generals who are caliphs, and there's a lot of argument about that. But I just think it's worth pointing out that there's nothing that's black and white, and that's what we have to get.
This is basically the whole point. Nothing is black and white. I mean, Maimonides was the caliph's personal doctor on one hand. On the other hand, some of the stuff that he writes says that this is an evil nation that are out to get us. So even the same person can can have completely different views of what is exactly happening at the same time. Yeah.
In view of the fact that the Arabs are as Semitic as we are, I'm wondering if perhaps Judeophobia might be a better word than anti-Semitism.
Could be. We have to remember that anti-Semitism is not a word that we invented, right? It was invented by anti-Semites.
Who were unaware that there were Muslims in the world.
That is true. But also right now, I actually had a person say that to me, a professor in sort of respectable Canadian university, said that no, I'm not an anti-Semite because Palestinians are also Semites and I have nothing against Palestinians. I kid you. Which is
disturbing as we might find it, is a valid statement.
Exactly. It does not make her any less racist, but
it defines it better.
It does.
Could we move on?
Yes, let's continue a little bit. The thing about the Dhimma status is that by the end of the First World War, Dhimma status became completely obsolete. Nation states were created.
By end of what?
The First World War. When the fall of the Ottoman Empire happened, there was never really Dhimma status is not really enforced in any country. And it was even before the fall of the empire, the late years of the Ottoman Empire promised equal rights to people regardless of race and creed. Yes.
So you still cannot go to Turkey and try to build a Christian church
Today?
today. It
Well,
is
that's
not-
probably new.
It is not possible. There are no Christian churches or no Christian church, no synagogue can be built in Turkey.
Could be. I did not know about that, but you still don't pay like a jizya, you don't
No,
pay
but
a
that-
poll
but
tax, you don't, it doesn't mean that they're not treated badly, right?
No, but it's given what Turkey did for us when we were expelled from Spain, which was a tremendous thing, whether, and now this, well, as you said, it's all
It's a
political.
different time.
It's a different time, and this is kind of the point, right? There's nothing inherent in Islam that says that you have to treat minorities badly or treat them good at the end of the day, treat them well. So basically, when the nation states swept the Arab world, nation states were established. All the constitutions of, let's say, Egypt, Iraq, Algeria, etc., when they were established, promised equal rights to everybody regardless of race, gender, or creed. What happened in reality is a different story. But no Muslim or Arab country, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, claims to be run by Islamic law. It's something that we have to remember. And like Israel is not run by Jewish law.
De facto, yeah, right.
Except.
We'll not get into that right now. But yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think it's important to point out that the vast majority of Muslims don't live in the Middle East.
That is absolutely true.
The vast majority of Muslims
do not live in the Middle
East.
Yes.
They live in Bangladesh and
Indonesia.
Indonesia and Malaysia and Pakistan.
And the United States.
And the United States. And so I think it's important to say what percentage of Muslims live in the Middle East.
It is,
Then you'll come
on
to
one hand,
Shia and
it
Sunni.
is true.
Most Muslims are Sunni.
Most Muslims are Sunni, and the biggest Islamic country in the world is Indonesia, and the second is India. But pretty much none of these places have ever had any contact with Jews, or at least not on a national level, right? So we can't really say how Jews were treated in Indonesia because
There are indigenous Jewish populations in India.
There are,
Yeah, but not-
but usually not in Muslim areas. But I mean, we don't really have Indonesian synagogues yet. Maybe no. Sorry, someone had their hand up here. So basically, since the establishment of the nation states in the 30s and 40s, we have two basically conflicting trends. On one hand, Arab countries promise everybody freedom of religion. On the other hand, what happens? Zionism happens. And basically, since the mid-40s till the 1950s, reality was that life for Jews in Arab countries became unbearable. And again, not because of theological reasonings. They didn't say you're Jewish, the Quran says this or that, or the Hadith says this or that. It's basically you're Jewish and Jews are trying to basically steal our country and Palestine, and therefore you'll be treated badly. Yes.
I think it's interesting also to note that, I don't remember where I read about it, that the Jews in Lebanon fought against Jews in Israel during, and that often there's conflicting, it's not so.
Conflicting
it's
interests,
conflicting
yeah.
loyalties for them as well, sometimes and sometimes not.
It is.
So again,
It's not only Lebanon. I mean, Iranian
also.
Jews, for instance, were and sometimes still are super loyal to the Iranian government. The Jews of Iraq, for instance, were, even though they were pretty much slaughtered in the 1940s and forced to leave, were sought as a huge betrayal. Most of them were not Zionists. Most of them saw themselves as Iraqis, first and foremost. They had high-powered jobs in the government and finances, and kind of like the Jews in Germany, they could not believe that they would be treated like these other Jews.
Yeah.
So, yes, there were a lot of Jews who saw themselves as Jewish Arabs at the end of the day. That they saw their Judaism as their religion that is practiced at home or the synagogue, but not a national identity. But, you know, reality has said something completely different. By the end of the 1950s, there are almost no Jews left in the Arab world. Yes.
So maybe this question is too much ahead, but do you think that if Iraqi Jews, I know some of them, would speak more openly that they actually reluctantly left Iraq, and in Israel or where else they are, they still didn't deal with their history, that this might change Jewish Arabic, Jewish Muslim relationships?
There is a trend to promote exactly this attitude. There's a movie called The Forgotten Refugees, and it's available freely on YouTube. It talks about basically the history of Jewish Arab refugees, and
what is it?
the Forgotten Refugees. Politically slanted, yes, but still very, very good. I recommend it to everybody. And there are groups that basically show this movie to Islamic college students all over the place to show that, yeah, that the history is more complicated than what they might think. So, some people say yes. At the end of the day.
I want to say it and make this point as a German Jew, that a difference started to occur when we stopped saying we, what was good for the Jews was for us, but saw it in a more differentiated way, that being a German Jew was for many people a good thing, and they also felt it as a betrayal. So putting all the Jewish history or focusing all the Jewish history to Israel and Zionism made it difficult also for Jews in Germany to cope with history, to start, I don't know, new relationships, and maybe there's also a Jewish Arabic story which is similar, and you know, the whole matter of relationships might change if there is more differentiation, how the people actually felt it or how they saw it themselves.
Yes, and this works in both ways, because there are a lot of, let's call it super left-leaning Jews who still say, we were forced to leave Iraq, and
So
Zionism kind of ruined it for us, and we have.
It's not a leftist thing. I want to see it in left and right, and on a very non-ideological level.
True.
Just what was history? How was the history? How did they perceive the situation?
Yes.
In the 30s and 40s, how and by whom was the Zionist enterprise constructed as a reason to turn against the Jews when they
Well,
left their own countries?
Basically, the 30s and 40s were a time that Arab nationalism was at its peak, right? And Zionism was seen as basically an obstacle to Arab nationalism. There were Zionist emissaries like Jewish agency people that came to Iraq and came to Morocco and tried to convince people to make Aliyah. Many of them had absolutely no interest in it, but was seen by the local government as a way to undermine them. And the